Okay, are we ready?
Sure.
Yep.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank everybody from the community for coming out today. Here to the beautiful Wheelhouse, a dispensary right here in our town of Port Hueneme. Today we're going to be doing a Cannabis Curious talk. And we've brought in a panel of experts that are going to make the stigma of cannabis, just make it very clear that it's not, it's actually a very positive thing for our community. And we brought in some panel members, as we said. So the first speaker, I would like everyone to give a round of applause for the Thunderstorm founder and CEO, Cameron Clark.
Thank you very much. Everybody. So what I want to talk about today is what does the cannabis look like from a brand and manufacturing company. Thunderstorm's been around for about 4 years. We used to do extraction. Now we just buy a distillate ourselves and then manufacture it and post-process it into final products. We make about 100 different SKUs of a variety of products, and I'll talk a little bit about them. But the starting point is that we're going to talk today about everything other than flower. So the starting point is really to talk about where does the oil come from, right? So the oil comes from the plant. The plant grows flowers, and the flowers have trichomes in it. Those trichomes have oil in them, right? And that oil can be extracted. So there's different methodologies to actually extract the crude oil from the plant, just like we do in tinctures and other types of old school methodologies for aromatherapy and other types of products that we all come to know. But the oil is extracted using these different types of solvents, whether the CO2 or butane or ethanol, and there's a variety of technology that does it. I don't know if you guys can see this really well, but probably not. But in general, the oil is extracted, and then it goes through what's called a dewaxing process. And the dewaxing is when the oil comes out of the initial extract, it's very, very thick and very gooey and very heavy, just like petroleum when it comes out of the ground. It has to be post-processed, right? So it's post-processed, they remove the wax in a process called dewaxing, and then it goes through another process called decarboxylation. Decarboxylation is what converts the THCA, which is the acid form of THC, which is the non-psychoactive version, into THC, which is the psychoactive version. And that's basically, we do that by just heating it for a couple hours at a very high temperature, and that converts it from the acid form. Once in that format, once it's dewaxed, you can use it into full spectrum oil, which some companies actually use for some of their products. There's a lot of it tends to be darker and has a lot of the chlorophylls and flavonoids and other compounds in it that make it give it that darker color. Within the last couple of years, companies have been focusing a lot on distillation, and the distillation process is essentially a purification process, purifying out the cannabinoids out of the oil and removing or filtering them from the flavonoids and the chlorophylls and the heavier molecules that are inside the oil. So those compounds are what remain in. I mean, it's basically just like your old-fashioned whiskey still. You basically boil off the compounds that are important. They boil off at about 220 degrees Celsius, and the cannabinoids boil off, and then they're cooled, and then they drop into another chamber where they come out and they're much clearer and much higher potency. So whereas the crude, when it comes out of the plant itself, is generally somewhere between, let's call it 5, depends on what parts of the plant you use, 5% THC to about 30% in heavy higher potency flowers. When it comes out in the crude, you get it, generally 10 to 18% THC is what you actually end up in the crude process. After it's dewaxed and distilled, you'll end up with something that's more along, 85 to potentially 95% cannabinoids. So it's a much, much purer form of the product. And with that, then you can then insert that into a variety of different types of products. So, for example, the general categories that you'll find in the shop are vapes. A lot of people see the vapes. Vapes are made by taking that oil and adding flavorful terpenes, either natural or synthetic, depending on the company that makes them, to add a little bit of flavor to the vapes. Distillate itself doesn't have much of a flavor, so most companies will add something back to give it more of a flavor. But as you add more terpenes and other things back into it, you drop the potency, and that's important for everybody to understand. Another thing I want to talk about as part of all this is the bioavailability. How much of these products actually end up in the bloodstream? Because if it doesn't end up in the bloodstream, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter if it's going into your system, because it has to end up in the bloodstream to be distributed throughout your body, so the cannabinoids can do the work that they need to do. Whether it's to relax you through the psychoactive effect, or whether it's to actually do some healing through your endocannabinoid system on various receptors in your body. Your endocannabinoid system is not just in your brain, it's throughout your entire body, and that's why cannabis is so powerful. We didn't even know the system existed until about 20 to 25 years ago. That's amazing, right? People have been consuming cannabis for thousands of years, and yet we had no idea why it was helping and healing. But now science is finally starting to be done. We're finally starting to get a sense of that. So vapes, the bioavailability, how much gets into the bloodstream of a vape is generally around 50%. Also flower is something similar to that. We all know that when you exhale, you see a lot of the smoke going out. You're exhaling a lot of the cannabinoids. So you only get about 50% of THC, CBD, or the cannabinoids in your bloodstream when you're able to vape. Another format is edibles that we've all seen. So we happen to make gummies, and other companies make chocolates and mints and other types of things. Those get processed by the GI tract and then by the liver. And oftentimes the THC gets converted into something called 11-hydroxy-THC, which is a different form of THC, which tends to give it that sort of heavier feeling. It also there is some science that points to the fact that it might actually add a little bit of the paranoia effect. So an edible experience is quite different from a vaping or flower smoking experience. They also take a lot longer. So edibles, get processed in the gut. That might take anywhere from 30 minutes up to an hour and a half, depending on the consumer. The bioavailability of edibles, a lot of people think that the bioavailability of edibles is actually greater than smoking. But the truth is, it's a lot less. Your body processes it and flushes most of it out. So if you're really healthy, you'll get maybe 25% of the cannabinoids in the bloodstream of an edible. If you're sick, if you have cancer, if you have some serious gastrointestinal disease, Crohn's disease or whatever, you might only get 5% of those cannabinoids from the edible in the bloodstream. And a lot of people don't understand that. It's really important that depending on the condition, you need to make sure that you're consuming the cannabis in a way that will maximize its ability to get into your bloodstream. Concentrates are obviously another category. Waxes and dabs and things like that. They're processed in additional step in a vacuum oven where some of the moisture is removed and makes them a little bit thicker and more waxy. Just like other inhalables, you get about 50% of the bioavailability of the concentrates. Beverages are similar to edibles. That's a popular category. Beverages also can take a little bit of time to process, but maybe not quite as much as an edible. Tinctures and oral sprays, those are rapidly becoming a very popular format. Some of that does go in sublingually, so you'll get a little bit more into the system. They tend to be 20 to 30% bioavailability. So tinctures can be a good way to actually ingest the cannabinoids. And then of course we have pills and patches are another format, and the patches will go into the bloodstream. Pills do get processed in the gut. So let me talk a little bit about Thunderstorm and what we do and how we do things, because we're a science-based company. We use science actually to be able to deliver more effective products. We tend to be one of the more innovative companies out there, and I'll talk as to why that is. Just a little bit about the company itself. We stand on is to drive the overall wellness of our patients and consumers, and then quality of our community. We think that cannabis is a very important healing tool, and we want the community to adopt it and be able to accept it and understand the power of it. So the products that we make, our first mainstream, most important product for us are our Kana gummies. These gummies are all made in-house. We compound them very, very carefully. So the compounding process is very similar to cooking at home. You add very specific quantities of all the elements, and then you blend them together, and you cook them in various stages. Our process is very, very rigorous. We weigh everything carefully. Everything is mixed at the appropriate time. We actually measure through a refractometer. We measure the amount of water in the gummy all along the process, so we know exactly when to pull it out of the cooker and inject it into molds for hardening, because we want a very, very consistent product. So the compounding process, the cooking process are very important. And one thing also that we do that I think is very important, you should check this in the products, the edibles products that you buy, is what's the homogeneity of these products? How consistent is that cookie on one part of the cookie versus the other part of the cookie? How consistent is that cookie from one cookie in this batch to one that you're going to buy 2 weeks from now? Very important for you to have that same very consistent experience. And so we work very hard in our compounding and measuring process to make sure that everything is made very, very consistently. And in fact, every scale in our processing plant is checked before every batch. So we actually test them on every scale with a known weight to make sure that and calibrate them accordingly so that everything is measured very well. And I'm very proud to say that Aaron's here from Cannabis, and Cannabis awarded us the most accurately formulated edible in the industry for 2018. That was a couple months ago at the Cannabis Award, and we were very, very pleased to accept that. So, and I think it's a testament to how our team operates and the way that the rigor that we have in our processes. We also make vapes. We also have the same level of rigor in the way we make vapes. By the way, we only use all natural ingredients. We don't use artificial ingredients in our products. Very important to look for that. You'll see that a lot of edibles out there might use dyes and things that are synthetic. You might want to check the labels to make sure that they use natural ingredients. The state has actually wanted us to make sure that we put all that on the packaging, so you should be able to find it there. Let's see. Oh, pesticides. Let's talk about pesticides for a moment. So pesticides have been one of the dark areas of this industry for quite a time. I think the single biggest, most exciting thing to come out of a regulated market is the fact that you can now find pesticide-free product on the shelves. That has been a huge benefit to all of us. And I'll tell you, it took me a good year to find pesticide-free raw materials when we were doing our extractions. Even everybody was saying this is organic, it's without pesticides. In fact, there was flooded with pesticides. And in fact, the black market or the gray market or the unlicensed market, whatever you want to call it, is still flooded with pesticides. And they're very toxic to the human body, and they're at levels that are thousands of times higher than our body, than are recommended by the FDA. This is a major problem, and this is a massive benefit to us all in this regulated market. The labs like Cannabis for testing all these things, and that we're forced to make sure that we produce products that are healthy for our patients and consumers. At Sunderstone, we have what's called the zero pesticide policy. Even though there's a minimum threshold, just like on your organic foods, there's a minimum threshold of pesticides that are allowed in any of your products. We have a zero pesticide policy. We don't allow pesticides at any level, not 1 part per billion of anything in any of our products. It's very important for us. And we reject more oil when we buy it than we actually buy. We're very, very particular about what we put in our products, because we don't want to put anything in your body that we wouldn't put in our own. And the team is very particular about the products. So let's just talk a little bit about nanotech and then I'll wrap it up. So we've heard a lot about nanotechnology in this industry. Nanotechnology simply means that the particles that are being ingested by your body are on a nanoscale. Nanoscale means that they basically are at the very, very smallest scale that can be absorbed by your body, right, at the molecular level. So, for example, in our sublinguals, we make these oral sprays, and the particle size is very similar to the particle size of the enzymes actually in your stomach. So when they float by, the enzymes don't even process it, right? They go directly into the bloodstream. So that means you get higher bioavailability. Nanotech is massive for this industry as well, because nanotech gets more of the product into your bloodstream. The problem is there's been a lot of nanotech that's not really nano. There's been a lot of talk about these products that they're nano, but they aren't. And so we're working through that as well in the industry. And I think Semistron is leading the charge of actually being able to deliver products that are truly nano and very high bioavailability. So in fact, we were the first company recently to launch a nano edible in California. We have our Kana Nano Gummies. And as proof, we hear time and time again that when people take them, they feel the experience in half the time. That's a game changer, right? If instead of waiting 45 minutes to feel the experience, if you have a back pain, you want it fast, right? You don't want to wait 45 minutes. People are feeling it in 15 to 20 minutes. That's tremendous, right? And I think that compression of the time of when we feel the effects is going to be a big part of the innovation in this industry over the next 5 years. And we're very happy to be one of the companies leading the charge on that. Because no one likes to wait. We all want to have our experiences sooner. And the problem with edibles in general is that edibles, you may take a brownie or a cookie and you might take 45 minutes, and maybe after like 25 minutes you eat a little more, and all of a sudden next thing you know you've taken too much. So the faster you get that experience, the more likely you're going to be able to maintain the dose that's right for you. So that's important for us. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about our Nano 5 sublinguals. These are oral sprays. We were the first company in the industry to introduce nanotech into cannabis 3.5 years ago. These products go under the tongue, and they have a nanomolecular technology called the liposome, which is a little nanoscale ball of fat. It gets in 5 to 10 minutes, and it has 80 to 90% bioavailability. This product is the highest bioavailability, as far as we've seen. This product is the highest bioavailability product in the industry. And we know this because we've actually put people in a hospital and taken their blood every 15 minutes to see how much of the cannabinoids actually end up in the bloodstream. This technology is a game changer. So people are feeling within 5 to 10 minutes, and I have all kinds of stories about folks that are healing all kinds of conditions, including a woman with Alzheimer's who just had her 85th birthday. And I don't know if you can see if I got it. We just had her 85th birthday. Here she is. I don't know if you can see this very well, but you can come up. This is her picture on the left-hand side 4 years ago. This is her today, and this is her 85th birthday last December. So it's been a life changer for her. So nanotech is, I think, going to be one of the most exciting parts of this industry and development of product development for the future. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cameron Clark, everybody. Another round of applause for that gentleman. Okay, our second speaker today is going to be talking about testing compliances here in California, as well as cannabinoid potency and consistency, and is the Entourage Effect real? Please give a round of applause for Cannabis President Aaron Riley.
Good. Thank you for the intro. Thanks for having me. It's great that I'm getting to follow up Cam. Cool story is actually when I started in this industry, I started in 2016, and Cam was actually a client. I can't say before that. We have 2 clients that are that old, and Cam was one of them. And I'm gonna tie that into talking a little bit about the history of compliance testing. When I started in 2016, there was no such thing as compliance testing. It was the only thing anybody cared about was potency, and that was really the only thing that most labs did. We had potency, terpenes, solvents. When I started, we weren't even doing pesticides. And businesses really didn't care about it for the most part. Cam was actually one of the first people. We had a couple people that were interested initially, but Cam was one of the first people that was interested in pesticide testing. So kind of the evolution of it was, in 2017, the state came in and said, hey, we're gonna, recreational cannabis is gonna be legal on January 1st, 2018, and they were gonna outline the framework for that. Prior to that, there was really no rules. It was Wild Wild West. They had, all the, the dispensaries were basically caregivers. It was, Prop D, 215, everything kind of tied into that. And what the state did is they outlined 3 trenches of testing that were going to occur. January 1, 2018, there was some pesticide testing, microbial. It was pretty rudimentary. A lot of people still, even at that time, weren't getting into it. July 1st of 2018, the state added, a list of 66 pesticides, most of the, more solvents, tougher microbial regs, microtoxins, and then at the end of last year, early this year, they added like heavy metals testing and microtoxins, and basically completed full circle. When I first started, we started doing pesticide testing in 2017 before it was required. 70% of products that we tested failed for pesticides. So almost 3 out of 4 things that people were consuming failed for pesticides. And back then, probably 90% of businesses didn't care, or they didn't really have access to stuff that didn't contain pesticides. So it was, that's just kind of what it was. So in terms of what regulations and testing have done for consumer safety, it's moved it miles. I mean, that would be like going to the grocery store and everything had what the FDA would consider toxic levels of pesticides 2 years ago, and now you can go to a licensed dispensary like Wheelhouse here and know that everything on the shelf has been tested, it's pesticide free. The process for testing compliance in California starts with the businesses doing R&D products for their formulations, all those things. So that's not required by the state, but it's common practice and it's good practice for businesses. What they do is they test all of their inputs. So somebody like Cam that makes gummies or vapes, he tests terpenes, flavonoids, anything that he's going to put into his products, he tests per cannabis regulation. So he tests them for heavy metals, he tests them for pesticides, solvents, everything that goes into the final product gets tested, including dosing. And then what happens is the lab is called to do the compliance test, and we send a representative from the lab to a licensed distribution location. We're currently doing 1/3 of all the compliance testing in California. We cover the whole state, all the way from Humboldt to San Diego, every day of the week. So we'll go to a licensed distribution location. We'll pick up that batch product based on how big it is how much sample we take. And we'll pull samples from anything. So basically everything except for flour is in units. So anywhere from like 1 to 7,000 units is pretty much a batch size. So we'll go and we'll pull 15, 20, depends on how big the batch is and how much product we need to test. For flour, we take 0.35% of that batch. At that point, after we sample, we have complete chain of custody of that product. It goes straight back to our laboratory where it begins testing. We check the product in, we make sure that we verify all of the forms, all the paperwork. Basically, the way the state regulates cannabis is there's traceability through the whole line of product for licensed cannabis. Like every input from every flower that was turned into oil, there's accountability and traceability for all that. So we go through the testing process. Phase 3 is 8 or 9 tests, depending on whether it's a flower sample or it's an infused product. Once that testing is complete, we send the business as well as the state the results for that test. If the test passed, then the distributor can go and sell that product to retail or other distributors. If it fails, the distributor has to quarantine that product. Something that's unique to cannabis that's different in ag or other consumer-facing industries is there's not really any product recalls. We haven't had any yet because of the way the regulations are set. product isn't released to retailers and the public until it's been verified as safe. So, you know, it's definitely above and beyond of other industry, but it really makes it a great place to be a cannabis consumer. You know, one of the things that is really important for that, and the reason that we do all these things, that the products cost more, that it's tested, that taxes are paid, is to protect consumer safety. I don't know if everyone saw that Leafly just did a big article. There was like 7 people hospitalized from a vape product in Northern California, and there's a lot of potential contaminants in vape products. Like we see it all the time. Cheap Chinese hardware can leach lead into the vapes. The FDA doesn't even have a safe amount of lead that's consumable. There's cutting agents, propylene glycol, which is a common one. Vegetable glycerin is another one. All these things that are very harmful for your body, and there's not really safe levels. The pesticides, you know, microbutanol, which is the most common pesticide in California, it's used on beans, grapes, you know, most other industry. It turns into hydrogen cyanide when you combust it. And it was a very popular pesticide for cannabis because it eliminates, you know, a lot of, it basically works as an insecticide and as a fungicide. So a lot of people used it because they couldn't grow without it. But, you know, basically if you're buying black market product, you're potentially consuming a cocktail of things that the government has said, hey, you shouldn't have this in your body. And not only that, you're inhaling them. You know, traditionally it's like if there's a little bit on your food, you can wash it off. Your liver processes these chemicals differently, but if you're inhaling it, it's going straight into your bloodstream through your lungs. And you know, as we've seen with the public, that's a very dangerous thing. Speaking on cannabinoid potency and consistency, so there's 2 big variables here. One is on the flower side, even a little bit on the oil side, the full spectrum oil. We're dealing with an agricultural product. So there's not really, you know, it'd be like picking blueberries and be like, do these blueberries weigh the same, or they're the same amount of calories, and there's blueberries, there's not a chance. It's the same thing with flour. You can get a general idea, and the way the regulations are set is that we're taking a representative sample of the batch. So it's a general idea, but there's certain parts of the plant that could be significantly more potent, like 5 to 10%, you know, swings. Fortunately, for consumers that are treating medical issues or want some consistency, there's products like the Cam makes where you can go and you can get 10 milligrams every pound. It's made from a refined version of the plant, distillate, and you can know what kind of dosing you're get consistently every time. So that's a good segue for consumers that want to know, not I'm going to smoke this and see how I feel, but want to know exactly how a product's going to make them feel, and the consistency for it too. Like my great grandmother's 99 years old, and you know she likes to eat edibles, but you know she actually enjoys it. And it's really funny because she was always, you know, historically she was always very conservative and, you know, anti-cannabis. And my dad, you know, she was having a lot of aches and pains and having trouble sleeping. My dad's like, hey, how about try some gummies? And she ended up just loving it. She's like, it reduces my anxiety, all these things. Well, I wouldn't feel comfortable giving her something where it was like a mystery dose, like, hey, just take this and see how you feel. And you know, it's like, no, we're going to start with 2.5 milligrams, and we're going to work up to 5. And you know, being on the lab side, I know which products are consistent, which manufacturers have tested all their products. So I could recommend knowing that she's not going to have a bad experience, because somebody that's 99 does not need to take, you know, too much edibles. That would be probably the first and last time they would ever be willing to try cannabis. And as Cam mentioned before, he did win. So we have an award show every year. It's called the Cannies, and what we do is we have science-based tests. So we do like the highest potency. In Cam's case, we did the most closest to label claim edible. So that's like 10. It was 10 milligrams, and that's 10 like with 4 decimal places, 10.000. And I think Cam was like 9.93 something. It was within 100th of a milligram, which is, I mean, we're talking like, if it was a drop on the table, you would just see, you know, how much THC is in that product. So that's a really good testament. That's probably one of the hardest awards to win at the Cannies. But we're doing that to recognize the brands that test with us, and you know, really take pride in manufacturing the product take pride in their growing. All the different practices that are measurable. It's not like a High Times award where it's subjective and it's like, oh hey, you just won an award because you bought the biggest booth here. It's something that we want our brands to be able to stand behind and say, hey, we actually won a science-based award because of what we're doing and the inputs that we're taking to go that far. Lastly, is the entourage effect real? I would say absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest things, and we're still researching the endocannabinoid system and how it affects people. But the entourage effect, we know that certain cannabinoids or certain things don't work well exclusively. I mean, if you look at the drugs, Marinol is synthetic delta-9 THC, and it has one of the worst reputations as a drug. It makes people literally you can take all the bad things with cannabis, and a lot of people that take Marinol describe feeling like that, anxious, paranoid, all these things, and that's literally a synthetic version of one cannabinoid. And on our end, we look at the entourage effect, and a lot of it's a feedback loop through our clients, through consumers, and some of the things that can attest to that is, one is there's certain strains of cannabis that are like 20% THC. Like an OG Kush, for instance, is one that's historically it's never been like a 35%. It's not going to be the highest one on the shelf. Well, when you're a consumer, that's usually the one that'll kick you in the ass the hardest. I mean, it's a strong strain, and it's never really that high in potency. It has a unique terpene blend and has a little bit of the other cannabinoids, but it's almost one of those things where it's, at this point, scientifically, it's unexplainable what makes the feelings of that more intense than something that's 30%, other than the fact that you can say, hey, there's an entourage effect. Everything in here is combining to make you feel a certain way. And that's all. I guess we're going to do Q&A at the end, so pass it back for our next speaker. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Aaron Riley. Everybody, another round of applause, please. Okay, our next speaker today is the author of the book, The Cannabis Premier. She's going to be talking about the myths and the facts about medicinal cannabis, as well as how to find the right dosage. Please give a big round of applause for author Ruth D. Fisher.
Thank you for having me here. I got into cannabis about 3 years ago. Prior to that, I really knew nothing about it. I was brought in, my brother, he has MS, and he's experienced really bad chronic pain from a lot of different sources. And he's been through the medical system, and the traditional system has failed him in a lot of ways. And one of his doctors finally said, hey, maybe you'll benefit from cannabis, maybe that might help. But the doctor really didn't know anything, wasn't able to give my brother any guidance as far as what he should be looking for, what type of dosage or anything to take. So he had this interesting experience where he walked into a dispensary and saw the tremendous variety of products there, and pretty much realized that he had no idea what he was supposed to be looking for. So I'm an analyst and researcher, and I have a lot of experience in the healthcare industry. So at that point, he contacted me and he asked me to help him do some research to figure out what he needs to be doing here, what he should be looking for. So that's kind of when I started getting into the industry and reading about it and learning about it. Then at some point, my brother, he's an engineer, he came up with this idea on how to kind of create a technology to help get other users in his position who are very unfamiliar with the product, to help them better navigate the system than he was able to do on his own. So I started doing a whole lot of research then and trying to figure out my nature is, how do things work? And so I was really curious about cannabis and how it worked on the body. And in order to design the technology, I really needed to understand kind of how all the pieces fit together. So I did a lot of research, spent a lot of time. The world of cannabis is really interesting. It's really complex. What struck me is I spent a lot of time researching different industries, and you go in and it's usually you can kind of put your arms around it. And pretty quickly you can kind of determine what's what and get a general idea of how all the pieces fit together. And in cannabis, I just kept reading, and I was like bombarded by all this information, and I had a really difficult time trying to understand how all the pieces of information fit together. And I'm an experienced researcher, and so I couldn't even imagine what other people were trying to go through to get through this and try and understand, is this something that's safe? Is this something that I would benefit from? So when I had done all this research to create the technology, my brother and I decided that we should put it in a book because we had both learned so much, and the book alone would help a lot of other people. So kind of the way I approach the industry is trying to understand, you know, to admit it, I came in and I was kind of skeptical. I didn't really know that much about cannabis, didn't really know anything about the medical aspects, but just kind of dismissed everything. It just wasn't really on my radar. But I had heard, you know, I grew up in the age of this is your brain on drugs, and so kind of had this in my mind, this, you know, gnawing feeling that, you know, am I recommending to my brother and to other people something that's not really safe? And so I did a lot of reading, and I wanted to, you know, figure out what the truth was. And then once I figured out what the truth was, I could go from there and figure out how to deal with it. But so, one of the biggest things out there, and I saw it in the newspaper again today, is that cannabis causes schizophrenia. And I kept, when I started looking at all the research papers, there's, I mean, literally thousands of research papers out there saying that, you know, cannabis, especially for adolescents, it leads to addiction, drug abuse, it's a gateway drug, it leads to people to consume alcohol and these harder drugs, and it causes schizophrenia and just, I mean, all these problems. And there's study after study after study saying this. And there's no real studies out there on people. There was lab stuff, you know, people playing around in cells in a lab, but no real studies on people saying, well, there's actually good stuff going on. And normally when you read about, say, a regular pharmaceutical, they'll say, well, yes, it had side effects, but it also helped in these other things. And in the cannabis literature, they don't say anything good about it. And you know, I was really curious about this. So finally, after a lot of reading, what I realized is, so it turns out that the federal government, the US federal government, is the largest provider of funds for research worldwide in science and medicine. And in 1937, when cannabis became effectively illegal, the spigot of funding dried up, and there was no more funding available for scientific research, except for NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and their mission is to study the causes and consequences of drug use and drug abuse. So you have this organization, and their specific mission is to understand the problems associated with using drugs. And these funds were available worldwide to researchers, and there was a real dearth, a real scarcity of funding available if you wanted to do it, to research it in a positive way. And so that explains why there's so many studies out there saying all this bad stuff. But that kind of begs the issue, well, you know, they could be right, and, you know, are they right? And so again, it turns out, okay, so switching gears for a second, it turns out that there's a study out there that's been done a lot by a lot of different researchers, and it shows that on days when people eat a lot of ice cream, you also see a lot of acts of murder and violence committed. And it gets better because on the days when people eat more ice cream, they eat it earlier in the morning, and the acts of violence and murder are committed later in the day. So from this, can we conclude that eating ice cream makes you commit murder? And this is the same idea of what's going on with cannabis, is they're saying that people who use cannabis also use other drugs, and they get into problems. And really, so in the example with the ice cream, it's more reasonable to think, well, maybe it's hot weather that's causing both things. That, you know, hot weather causes people to eat more ice cream, and it causes people to commit more acts of murder and violence and get agitated. So the same thing with all the cannabis studies, they never ask the question, okay, who is this person and why is he using cannabis? So it's likely, it makes more sense, at least to me, that you're talking about people who are coming from troubled backgrounds, and they're looking for an escape, or they're looking for a way to self-medicate, and they're turning to cannabis. So they're looking to it as a reflection of something else that's going on. So it's reflecting what they're doing, it's not actually causing it. Now, as for schizophrenia, does cannabis cause schizophrenia? There's been a ton of research on this, and a lot of people still say yes, in fact, this is true. Personally, what I find more compelling is the argument that people who are already predisposed towards schizophrenia, when they consume it, the cannabis will trigger it and bring on the onset sooner than it might otherwise come on, but in and of itself, it doesn't cause the schizophrenia. And what I find really compelling about that situation or that argument is that it turns out that most people who have schizophrenia, something like 90% smoke cigarettes. And they've discovered that nicotine in cigarettes acting on your nicotine receptors helps alleviate the symptoms associated with schizophrenia. So if they're smoking cigarettes to get some relief, it makes a lot of sense that they'd be smoking cannabis as well. So my conclusion is that really these are people trying to self-medicate, and they're self-selecting. They're a group of people who are more predisposed to try and self-medicate or find relief than people in the normal population. So cannabis is kind of a reflection of their schizophrenia, it's not a cause. So now what about the idea that cannabis causes lung cancer? So that's another interesting one. A lot of studies out there saying smoking cannabis causes lung cancer. And it turns out that most of the studies done, they're looking at cannabis users, but it turns out the cannabis smokers are also smoking cigarettes. And so you have to isolate the effect of the cannabis from the effect of the smoking cigarettes. So if you throw out all the studies that they don't control for this, and they're using people who both smoke cigarettes and cannabis, look only at people who smoke cannabis, then all of a sudden they can't find a causation there. They don't see that the cannabis smoking is causing cancer. And that's kind of interesting because everyone knows that smoking is not great for you. It can be toxic to your lungs. It can cause a lot of problems. So the question is why aren't cannabis smokers getting these problems? Because they are smoking and they're getting toxic effects from that. So what they think is actually the cannabinoids in the cannabis is counteracting or mitigating any damage caused by actually smoking. And so again, this makes a lot of sense to me. That when you look at, take out the studies that aren't controlling for the cigarette smokers, focus on the cannabis smokers. Are they getting lung cancer? And it turns out, no, they're not. So this is all, it's interesting to think about all the information that's passed around society and how wrong so much of it is. And if you dig down to the details, you can generally figure out what's really going on. So to continue on, another myth that comes out is cannabis impairs cognitive development. And especially in kids, it causes their brains not to develop very well. So it turns out your brains continue developing until you're about 20 or 25. And they do have concerns about adolescents smoking cannabis. Your brain is still developing and it could potentially cause problems, although the jury is still out and they're still trying to research this and understand this better because they really haven't nailed it down. On the other hand, there are very clear pediatric uses for cannabis, such as epilepsy and autism and cancer. And certainly if you're dealing with a child who is so withdrawn and removed from the world because they're seizing all the time, the prospect of maybe perhaps generating some cognitive impairment is a worthwhile trade-off if you can have the child interact again and come back into the world and have some quality of life. And personally, I believe it's up to the parents to decide whether or not the costs and benefits of using cannabis and the potential risks are worth it or not. And that's their decision to make. Finally, people think that in order to use cannabis for medical purposes, you have to get high. And that's another myth. That's absolutely not true. Cannabis without THC in it, CBD is really popular right now. You can use cannabis without THC and avoid the whole issue altogether. But actually, I think cannabis is underrated in a lot of ways, especially now with the craze towards CBD. CBD is kind of getting all the glory. They're just saying that's the safe one. And yes, I give CBD a lot of credit. From what I've read, there is a lot of benefits and a lot of great stuff going on there. However, there's a lot of really wonderful stuff with THC. Again, you still don't have to get high when you consume THC. You can take it at low doses in order to get the benefits from it without risking the potential side effects. And the good news is if you do overdo it, and if you do get some of those side effects with paranoia or anxiety, it's completely self-limiting. It will go away on its own. All you have to do is wait it out, and it causes no permanent damage. And so really the trick with cannabis is to start with go slow, as everyone says. You want to start with doses that are, say, less than 2 milligrams THC in order to see how you deal with it, and then kind of work your way up, and then you minimize any of the risks of the bad side effects. And then kind of stepping back from that position, when you're talking about cannabis and you're talking about risk, especially from a medical perspective, really, you know, for my brother, for example, he's on some really gnarly drugs, and they cause really gnarly side effects, and they still can't really, you know, fully help him. And he's turning to cannabis because it can provide relief. And if you say, well, if you weren't using the cannabis, what are the alternatives? You know, what are the risks and benefits of the other stuff that you would be using if you weren't using cannabis? They really suck. They're really bad. And so it's not a question, does cannabis have side effects? It's how do those side effects compare to the other drugs that you would be using instead? And as for the people, and these are the people who have these really nasty conditions and who are suffering these effects, who are the ones who would be taking the higher doses. So say from MS, from cancer, from AIDS, you know, the wasting syndrome. These are people who are taking high doses because they have really serious problems. And so, you know, they're willing maybe to take the risk to get the benefits. And as for people who say, whoa, you know, I'm just in it for more wellness things and I want it to help me sleep, I have a little joint pain maybe, and I don't really want to risk any of the side effects, well, they're going to be taking lower doses anyway, and so they're naturally not going to come up against the same type of potential for bad effects. So really the question there to be looking at is not what are the problems associated with cannabis, but what are the problems associated with cannabis relative to the potential alternatives that you would be using if you didn't use cannabis. Okay, moving on to finding the right dose and looking at the different products. There's an issue here, and it took me a really long time to figure this out. I grew up in a medical family. My dad was a private practice physician, and I know, you know, kind of what doctors go through. I was always a real big fan of the healthcare industry. They had people in the healthcare, the traditional healthcare industry, the science researchers, the people from pharma, and most of the medical doctors out there. They're raised in this environment, you know, the healthcare system with all its perspectives on how to do things right and what the proper standards are. And for medications, kind of what the proper standards are, go back to the early mid-1800s with the germ theory of disease. And that's when they first discovered, you know, germs, and germs can contaminate things. And that's when they started making this effort to purify everything. And they thought that, you know, in modern medicine, we cannot settle for anything lower than this gold standard of pure medicine, because what we want to do is we want to make sure we're looking only at the particular ingredient that we want, that it's purified, there's nothing else in there that it's going to taint, that's going to taint it, and that when we go from dose to dose to dose, we're getting as standardized an effect as possible. So people from the medical industry, this is the view they're coming from. And so all of the pharma versions, with some exceptions from GW, which is now doing some whole plant extracts, but all the medications coming from the healthcare industry tend to be purified, isolated extracts. In contrast, you have this whole other group of people and this whole other set of research coming more from the cannabis industry and the herbal medicine industry and that whole tradition, which looks at herbs in whole plant form as medicine, and it says, you know, nature made these things, and there's like 500 different compounds in a cannabis plant, and you know, they all work together and they all enable things. And so again, stepping aside for a second, I'm a baker. I love to bake. I make a lot of cookies, and what's kind of amazing to me is when you make cookies, they all start with flour, sugar, and butter, and vanilla. And then, so you adjust the different ratios of these things, and then sometimes you want raisins, or sometimes you want chocolate chips, or whatever, but they all work together to provide the cookie. Some of them provide the rising, and they provide, you know, chewy versus cakey, and they provide the consistency, they provide the flavor, and they're all working together. And to think of like extracting only the flower, that's not going to give you the full cookie experience. So I look at cannabis and all the different ingredients in there, especially the terpenes and the flavonoids are up and coming. They're all working together to enable the cannabinoids. And when you strip out just the cannabinoids, say THC, you're essentially disabling all of its enablers. And what convinced me personally that I believe that the whole plant effect is better than the isolate effect is two things in particular. One is the Entourage Effect, which we've already heard from, that says you want to use all the different compounds together. And as a matter of fact, they have given people, they've done studies where they've given people isolate and they've given the same people whole plant extracts. And I think in almost every case, the people prefer the whole plant extract. They get better effects, they need lower doses, and they suffer fewer side effects. Also in there, in the Entourage Effect, you have CBD and THC working together, and they're really this power couple, and they're really amazing together. And when you have CBD with THC, CBD increases the rate of absorption of THC, which means you need to take lower doses. So which means that you're less predisposed to any bad effects like paranoia or anxiety. And also, they enable each other. And so just the two together provide so much more benefits than any one alone. The whole plant effect enables the Entourage Effect, but there's another really, really interesting thing that I don't really hear people talk about that I thought was really fascinating in the literature, and that's that they do all these studies and they have people, especially with the pharmaceutical versions where they're the isolates and the purified compounds, and they give people a dose and they either find it doesn't work or they get really bad side effects. And what it turns out is that when you have a purified sample, you get this very, very narrow range of potential dosing where you can get an effect. So say, for example, you really need around 10 milligrams, and you can get 9 or 10 or 11 milligrams, but if you undercut that region, you're not going to get any effects, and if you overshoot the region, you're going to get really bad effects, which means you have to get really precise dosing. And given that each person's different and each person's going to take a different dosing, it's going to be really difficult to help each person find that sweet spot where they can really benefit from cannabis. On the other hand, when you switch over and you use the whole plant, they find that you no longer get this narrow range of dosing, that it becomes a much more positive relationship where you get more gradual benefits as you increase the dose. And of course you can still overdo it, but you no longer are constrained to this very narrow region where you have to limit yourself in order to be able to get the effects. So it was those two things. It was the Entourage Effect and this dosing range that convinced me that whole plant cannabis is the way to go. So now moving on, how do you know which dose is right for you? So you have a particular medical condition and you're coming into cannabis and you want to know, what do I take and what am I looking for and how much do I take? And there's going to be a couple of different things that you're going to want to look for. So first is each person has an endocannabinoid system, and each person, their system is relatively unique. So they react to THC differently than other people. So if I take a 5 milligram dose of THC, I'm going to have a different effect than if he takes it, because he just has a different body system. And there are some people who are very sensitive to it and others can tolerate more. So first thing you want to know is, what is your particular tolerance? So again, you start low, you see how your body reacts, and you start increasing the dose until you find something that's right for you. The second issue is your particular medical condition is going to make a difference, because they're finding that if you have, say, cancer versus depression or anxiety or PTSD or pain, each of those conditions is going to want a different combination of compounds. Some are going to want CBD, CBDA, THCV, CGN, or any of those. In particular, terpenes. Linalool's better for sleep. Caryophyllane's better for like inflammation. And so, depending on your disease, you're going to want a certain profile a combination of ingredients. And that's the entourage effect, and that's going to depend on your particular condition. They've also found, interestingly, that not only do you want to have, say, CBD and THC together, but you want to have them in a certain proportion, say a 1-to-1 proportion or a 3-to-1 proportion for your particular illness. And then the last thing, so as I said, that CBD is very popular right now, and people like it because they don't have to worry about the whole THC and psychoactive thing. So it turns out that really, if you're dealing with any sort of pain, people start out on CBD and it works for a while and it stops working, and so they up their dose and it works again, and then it stops working, and they up their dose and eventually it stops working, and then they add in a little bit of THC and they get effects again. And when they finally find their sweet spot of a combination of CBD and THC for pain, they eventually get to the point where it works and it continues to work. And they don't see that same problem that they have with CBD where, well, it did work for a month, but then it no longer works. So really, if you have pain, they've shown that THC is really important to relieve pain. So again, the combination of factors that will be important for determining what you as a particular individual want for your condition, it will depend on your particular tolerance to THC. It will depend on your medical condition and what combination of different compounds you want that they have shown will best address your particular needs. And you want to look at what ratios they have found of THC to CBD that you think that they think will help you best with your condition. And again, there's a lot going on here. We put together all this information into charts and graphs and explain it all, and it's all in the book. And so if you're interested more in this, our medical cannabis primer covers all this information. Before I end, there's two last things I want to point out to be aware of. One is the biphasic effects of cannabis. The cannabis is kind of, other things do this too, but it's kind of weird that if you take a low dose of cannabis, very often you'll get very different effects. In fact, the opposite effect as you get if you take a higher dose. So for example, if you take CBD at low doses, it tends to promote alertness. But if you take CBD at high doses, it promotes sleep. So you can imagine, I know there's a lot of people out there who are using CBD for insomnia, and if they're afraid of it and they're taking very small doses because they're afraid to take it, they're going to end up waking themselves up instead of helping themselves sleep. So you need to be aware of these biphasic effects. And the last thing to be aware of is CBD in particular, but also the other cannabinoids tend to increase the rate of absorption of other drugs that you're taking. So if you are taking other drugs and you start taking cannabis, you want to be careful and look into any potential drug interactions. You might have to decrease the dosage of the other medications that you're taking. And thank you very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, again, another round of applause for Ruth Fisher, author of the Cannabis. Okay, so our next speaker is going to be talking about taxes and how they benefit the community, also putting a new face on the cannabis user and putting down the stereotypes of cannabis. Now, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the founder of the Wheelhouse, Zaharlaji, right here.
First and foremost, thank you to all the panel speakers for attending this. We really appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy days. The industry, as you know, is a new face. As you guys can see, most of the people that are on the panel have been in the industry for 4 or 5 years, not that long. It's really the fact that the face has changed. They want to come in the space and get educated, informed, and really take their knowledge of other industries and bring it into cannabis. And it really has summed up what the new cannabis space really looks like. It's everybody new that wants to understand the medicinal purposes, even the relaxing properties, the recreational purposes, but they also want to know the science. As I call it, it's the adult industry. The adult industry meaning somebody who wants to be informed, educated, knowledgeable about exactly what they're taking and how they're taking it. As a dispensary owner, this is my second dispensary, and I've had the pleasure of working with Cameron, for example, for about 3.5 years when the market was in the other Prop 215 market share, where we didn't have to follow all these different rules. But we were probably one of the first dispensaries to say, hey, who out there is following the rules, who is looking forward, not backwards. And it really hurts the dispensary owners in every aspect when every single one of these laws change. July 1st, that changed the entire market. That means everything on my shelf is no longer good. Where does that product go? Who eats that loss, right? Number two, I also get the pleasure of actually telling everybody, guess what, we're the first ones in the industry to have these products and services. We have somebody like Cameron who actually does the research. We actually use, we make sure they are using labs and facilities that are licensed, that are actually regulated, so they don't just have false testing, because that was a huge, huge issue and concern in the past. Was all these labs would come up and say and create testing whenever was required. So the regulations and all the rules that are coming into place has really, really taken the industry to a new level, which gives the dispensary owners like me an opportunity to really give that product to the end user, the consumer. Really give them what they need, make sure that our staff and everybody's educated, informed. We continue to have Cannabis Curious talks like this. We attend lots of events like this. And we go ahead and we make sure that we get all the information. The good news is we're just starting. The science is all just coming into play. Good news is also now there's actual funding coming from the private sector. As you guys can see in the Canadian stock market, a lot of companies have gotten public and got it funded, so that we can spend the time on research and development and making sure the end consumer gets quality product that really is beneficial to them. Half the audience here is pretty informed. They want to come out here and understand more and more and more. So in local communities, dispensary owners like me, and we have 7, it's called the Green Mile. And in Port Hueneme, especially because it is a new community of cannabis in Ventura County, have been regulated to a little bit more of effect, which is, people say, you're regulated, that's a bad thing. No, that's a great thing. Everybody loves playing Monopoly when you play by the rules, and when you win fair and square and you won fair and square. So the rules are here for us all to play fair. The brands the opportunity to share their differentiating factor, labs that tell you exactly what that brand is doing, and making sure that the dispensary owners are following each step through the process and making sure that the consumer gets exactly what they're expecting. That's really the end user for me. I mean, I hate to say it, they've hit every single point that I wanted to talk about. They really have, because that's the information I want to give out to the consumers, right? We want to make sure the consumer, when they come in here, they don't have that old 80s feel of walking into that old record shop and feeling like this guy or girl just wants to sell me a product and get me in and out as fast as possible. Our conversations are now changing from, hey, how much THC does that have? To, hey, what are those terpene effects? What are the cannabinoids that are going to affect me? We actually get people that say, hey, I have a family member who has MS. I have a family member who has cancer. I have somebody who has, cirrhosis of the liver. They're at the final stages. There's a lot of things this actually benefits. I'll share my experience of why I'm in the business. It's very simple. I had somebody from the family that was also sick. I saw a lot of people getting ill, and there was no help for it. And it was amazing to see physicians and doctors that cannot write the prescription here saying, I'm a dispensary owner, and look at some of my family members and going, what are you doing taking my medicine? Take my prescription and throw it away. Take his. It'll make you feel much better. These are doctors, and they're like, I wish I could prescribe this. I wish I could give you more information on this, but they can't. My sister works at a surgical center, one of the top ones, and most of those doctors are now trying to avoid opiates. We have a huge opiate epidemic right now, and people getting addicted. And it's amazing how many people I hear and how many centers I hear now saying, it's not the gateway drug, it's the get out of drug. This is your mediation drug, or whatever, I don't know the exact the terms, but it gets the individual off the opiates, makes them calm, gives them the less anxiety, and the right dosages helps those individuals. We were in Thousand Oaks, and they had a meth addict come and say, I'm no longer on meth because of cannabis. They're not saying the opposite. They're not saying, hey, guess what, guys, I got cannabis, and now I'm gonna go try that. It's not that. It's usually a prepositioned attitude or addictive personalities and other sciences that I'm not the expert in, but these guys are here. But as a dispensary owner, my goal is really to help inform the customer, making sure that I and my team work with the right brands, the right labs, to provide the right product for the end user. I still think California is way behind. We talked about the Wild West 3 years ago. I think we're still in the Wild West in my mind. Because if you look at Canada and how much science they put into it, Germany, Israel, you look at all of the other countries, even South America, they are going into this industry very, very quickly, very, very fast, and they're putting a lot of dollars behind it, a lot. A lot of dollars equals a lot of researchers, the best experts to do the best research. You got the best and the best and the best because you're getting the best. You got a lot of pharmaceutical presidents leaving their pharmaceutical companies and joining cannabis companies. That in itself tells me a lot. When you see a prime minister of Canada legalizing through an entire nation, you see it coming here too. Mexico's got another ballot. We've got a lot of countries now coming. So if we just think cannabis is in California alone, no, it's not. It's worldwide. People are getting informed. In my mind, this is the cheapest time in the world as a retailer to give out education. Why? Because everyone's curious. Everybody in the world is curious. You can go to a grocery store right now at Vaughn's and you can see the Time magazine with a bud leaf on it. You got a lot of books coming out, a lot of research, a lot of stuff coming out. And the beautiful part of that is we have information finally. We don't have myths and myth busting. Because you know, the old school days, I laugh about this. I hope this stereotype never leaves. Because unfortunately, I'm a cannabis user, and I love when I smoke something, I have 3 of my friends with me, and we actually communicate. I hope that stigma never goes away, where people are actually open-minded and communicate and sit down and have a nice session without any alcohol, without anything that could actually hurt them in that way. So I hope that stigma doesn't go away. But I do hope the stigma of the guy that's just there to get high and sits around watching TV all day, is lazy all day, accomplishes nothing all day, that stereotype is gone. Because I am a cannabis user and I show up to work more than most people do. If you know what I mean. I'm here all the time. You know? Now, what does cannabis do for the community? So the good thing about Fort Miami, and I will praise them for it first, because again, we have a location in LA. LA is a little bit more of a challenging city because again, it's so large and it was one of the first industries to have every market, black, white, gray, and everything in between in the marketplace. So it's a really challenging industry. But in Port Hueneme, we have our neighbors. Right next door, we have a dispensary. Down the block, we have another dispensary. Around the corner, we have another dispensary. So within a mile radius, we have 7 dispensaries. All 7 dispensary owners get together and communicate. Yeah, we all have different business models. So does Jack in the Box, and so does Subway, and so does Burger King. But they all sell burgers at the end of the day, including the mom and pop shop guy who has a burger, and then the fine dining restaurant who has his burger. And everyone has their business model, right? And that's what makes the customer experience. And that's where at the end of the day goes, is you choose the experience that you want, as long as the product quality is there. But on top of that, the city has included a 5% tax on this gross sales, which is a good thing for the city in every aspect, but the consumer obviously is the one absorbing that fee. But that also has developed a lot of great things with this city. It's taken it partially out of its deficit. We're not the only part that's taken it out of its deficit, but we have definitely added revenues to the business. You guys see the streets being paved recently in Port Hueneme? I wonder where that's coming from. Funding from the city. The 4th of July, that was saved. And that wasn't even Port Hueneme, that was Oxnard. You know, the chief of police reached out to everybody and said, hey guys, can you give back to the community? Otherwise the fireworks show is not going to be on. Not one dispensary owner said no. 100 beds. Get Skunk Master's the biggest credit. They were able to donate a very large sum, including other dispensaries, and being able to provide 100 beds for the homeless. How does that help the community? They can take their kids out and not have to deal with the homeless, you know, harassing them or bothering them. But the good news is also the homeless have a place to get food and shelter and make sure they have a comfort. Because unfortunately, that's an unfortunate circumstance that they're in too. So it really, really, really does give back. Also, we give back to the REACH program, the beach cleanup. On top of the 5%, we have also committed 1% to go to nonprofits. 0.5% goes where the city and local community, where we're trying to focus truly on Fort Unique, because obviously if they're supporting us, we want to support them also. But close to the other 0.5% goes to wherever our passions are, whatever we want to get up to, and how we want to help our community, how we want to leave a legacy. So it really does change the behavior and mannerism and the face of cannabis, because I used to be an ex-banker with Wells Fargo for 15 years, and what did I do? Every 6 months we'd be donating to some nonprofit, helping some community, feeding the homeless, doing all the same stuff that I'm doing today. Wow, surprise, I'm a normal business. And that's really the stigma I need to get out of. Every one of us in this room is now a professional. We actually put our names and we don't hide from cannabis. We actually put our social media on cannabis. We have our names everywhere posted. I'll give you an example. I got my bank account shut down just on Friday. Why? Because I have put myself on the business better people. And when the bank did a research, they said, you sell cannabis. Can't have you have a bank account. So those are the challenges we face. But guess what? Next step. Good news is the Senate's passing a bill. Good news is more money's coming in saying, hey, let's fix this problem. Hey, by the way, the consumers, all of you guys are out there saying, hey, give them a bank account. We need them to live so they can feed us. Right? They can give us the right product. We don't want to hit the black market. The black market today is booming. We are not going to hide that fact. That is a big challenge for all dispensary owners. Why? Education. The last 20 years I've been buying from the same guy. Yeah, the last 20 years you've been using that same poison. But you don't know that. Why are our prices more expensive at dispensaries? Did you guys see the steps we have to take to get to the dispensary? Packaging, regulations, testing, they all cost money. They really do. And to survive in the business, we have to have the prices go where they are. Good news is, as the black market deteriorates, prices will lower because there'll be more and more licensed facilities. And as we have more and more licensed facilities, the more and more regulated this business will become, and the more regular it will become. At that point, we'll have to determine which burger you like the best, basically. And that's where brands like Cameron will say, guess why you're coming to this shop with my burger? Because it's the best. And these are the only people allowed to sell it. Make sense? So that's really it. I'm the kind of short and abbreviated version just due to the fact that these guys did such an excellent job sharing the information and education that I really want to put out there for the consumer. And all dispensaries that are licensed, support them. Really support them. Make an announcement, go tell your friends and support those businesses. Do you notice I didn't say just support mine? I really want to support the industry. Everyone in this panel right now wants to support the industry. We care about you guys as individuals, and we really want to help. And if that's how we really feel, it doesn't matter whether you get the medicine next door or here, as long as you get your medicine, and it's the right medicine for you, and it makes you feel good, and gives you the effect that you need. And that's it for me, guys.
Okay, again, a big round of applause for everyone on the panel today. We're going to open it up to questions on the floor. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and we will be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
See, I'm still cannabis curious. Cameron, what really differentiates you from other brands? I mean, we carry, I think, probably 50 different brands in our shop, if not more. We have over 1,000 SKUs. Your market continues and your shelf space continues to grow with me in both my locations. Consumers continue to like your product. Explain why that really is. I get the testing and all that fun stuff, but really, what is the true core of your business model?
Yeah, I think this is really important, actually. The company is called Sunderstorm. A sunderstorm is a thunderstorm where the sun shines through the rain clouds. That's really been kind of our ethos from day one. We wanted to come in this industry that has kind of a dark and hidden past, and we wanted to be that bright shining light that came in and really made a difference and cleaned up some of the old issues and problems that the industry has had. And so this is really core to our philosophy, why I actually entered into this industry. I also have a science background. And I spent a lot of time traveling around the world, doing plant medicines all over the world. So I'm very much into plants and plant medicines. And I spent a bunch of time in India, so my business partner and I are also very keen on kind of Buddhism, Hinduism, and consciousness, and the study of consciousness. And it's interesting, I came to this industry because all of these things have blended together in my life to deliver me where I am today. I feel like everything I've done in my life to date is actually allowing me to provide the meaning that I want to provide in this world. And so that core kind of experience and core kind of philosophy flows not through just why I started this company, but through the culture of our entire business, right? And all of our production staff, and sales reps, and the demo team. These are very, very passionate people about the plant and about the medicinal aspects of the plant and about wanting to change the world. And that flows into, like I said, everything that we do. Sometimes we make mistakes, but we correct them. We work, it's always a constant improvement. But that means when we look at something from in the early days, we tested things, right? And we tested other products out there. And if you go to the BCC website, you'll see a video of me talking about how we tested products very early on, and because we recognized what the holes were in the industry and where we could improve. And I think that core philosophy is just really, it drives us, and it wants us to constantly improve. And having the science background, wanting to make science and consciously made products. I mean, our tagline is where science meets consciousness, right? To me, that really says it all. Consciously made products with the science behind them and constantly driving innovation. One thing I didn't talk about here is that we're also partnering with a company called Endocannabinoid Health that makes a DNA test kit. That's what I think is being sold here. The whole concept behind this is to be able to test test your own genome to see how cannabis interacts with your own genome, right? That's also the future of this industry. We constantly want to push science and innovation because there's been a dearth of it for way too long, and the Israelis have had a massive upper hand on this. So we want to get back in the game and create some real science here in the United States.
I don't have a question, but I want to thank all you guys for educating everyone, because I've been a medical cannabis user for a lot of years. I have chronic pain. I don't know what I would do without it. I'd probably be addicted to one of the opioid products out there and maybe not even be around. So thank you for taking all the stigmatism off of it, because I've been walking around for many years not letting people know the products that I've been using for my pain management, which never was any of the big pharma products that they have out there. Tried to avoid them like the plague. So I thank you guys for all the things that you brought to the cannabis industry.
People know that I'm a cannabis advocate, and they always ask me questions, right? From basic questions to the more advanced. What is the safe, obviously here everybody's an advocate. What is the safest way to respond to people when they ask, how should I start? What do I need to do? I have this. I started giving my dad a CBD THC mix about a year, almost 8 months ago. He has Alzheimer's and dementia. I didn't go to a doctor, we didn't go to a cannabis doctor or anything. I was just tired of the pain that I was seeing him. He was getting agitated or irritated, and I started giving it to him, and it changed him completely for the good. But that's a unique case, and we were very lucky. But how it was blending with his other medications, I did a little research, but not too much. We don't want people doing that. What is that safe answer to give people to say when they ask, how should I get started? I have a pain, or I have this, I have that. Because we don't want it just to go right down to the dispensary.
You said you were the dosage expert.
Question.
Excellent question, and that's why I wrote the book, because my brother's dealing with that question. So as I said, there's been a lot of research done, and we're at the very early stages. but there are some indications, and you can find them everywhere. I have one in the book that I wrote that lists all the different indications, all your different medical conditions, and it tells you different cannabinoids and terpenes now, and as I said, in the future, there'll probably be more. Yes, there's a poster right here.
That's a great poster.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very
You guys
much.
have it in Calgary Medical, see if they should have it on the walls here if they don't already. That's a fantastic.
That, we had that design is taken from one of the tables in the book, and we had it made up into a poster, and it's, what it does is it lists all the different conditions on the left, and it has, what I did is I went out, and again, there's a ton of research, and of course people don't agree, and what I did is I just collected all the information and said, okay, these people reported this, and these people reported this, and when you kind of aggregate it all and put it together and trying to make some sense of it, you get this little table here, which essentially what it shows is it starts here from pure CBD. CBD to THC is the highest. And it goes down to this is pure THC. This is pure CBD, this is pure THC. So 1-to-1 ratio right here is equal amounts THC, CBD. And if you a default would probably be to start there, because again, most things you want to use THC. A couple of things you don't. If you have anxiety and depression and PTSD and epilepsy, especially, and like a lot of the stuff for kids, you're not using the THC. But there's information out there on which ratios you could, and that just gives you kind of a guide. And it turns out that there's pretty much 3 general categories of ratios, and they start out as the low that are the THC dominant, and so there are ratios that are less than 1-to-1 CBD to THC, and then you have the group that's mostly CBD that's at near 15, 18, 20-to-1, and then you have a bunch around 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, maybe 10-to-1. And again, you're just kind of playing around with these. If I were to start, if I had a condition and if I didn't know any better, I would probably start with the 1-to-1, and I would probably start with, because I'm very conservative, 1 or 2 milligrams of THC. So that means 1 or 2 milligrams of THC and CBD. Take that, wait several hours or a day, see how I react, and then look to see kind of what the studies say. If they say I should go to like a 5-to-1 or a 1-to-1, then kind of move in that direction. If it says that I need linalool or THCV, for example, then I would try to look for a variety that included those different compounds. But what's really interesting about cannabis is more so than any other drug, it's really personalized medicine. And the doctors, if they were to say, okay, everyone needs this dose, from everything I know, I would say that's the wrong way to approach it. And basically what you want to do is, for each different patient, it's going to be a learning process. And everything I've heard is it's going to take you a month, 2 months, 3 months to start to figure out what's best for you. And what you really need to do is start somewhere and then adjust the dose towards your ideal dose. And if you use these things that I mentioned in the talk, the ratios and the combinations of ingredients, and kind of move in the direction that you think you should be going slowly, then probably that's the best that you can do.
I'll add something to that as well. I think it's also important to think about the format, right? Is this someone who wants to smoke? Is this someone who needs something fast, needs something to feel the effect faster? When they're managing their pain, do they want to wait 45 minutes, in which case an edible might be a good idea. Or do they want something that's a little faster, maybe like a tincture, and they don't want to smoke? I would probe them and say, what type of format? What is the condition? Is it in the gut, right? And, that might, smoking may not be the best thing for the gut, right? A tincture or an oral spray or an edible might be better for the gut, or a beverage even. So I would think about, what is the condition, and probe them on, what format is really good for them. Kind of think about that a little bit.
So that's a really excellent point. The mode of ingestion, the form of the product, is going to be relevant for a couple of different reasons. One is different forms are naturally going to have different cannabinoids in them. So, for example, if you want THCA or the acidic form, CBDA, then you're going to want to lean towards raw or undecarboxylated cannabis, and that's going to be a particular form. Whereas if you want the neutral compounds where it's decarboxylated, you're going to want separate, different types of forms to use. And the other is, as Cameron said, there's a real clear trade-off between, say, bioavailability, time to onset, and how long the medication lasts. So there's certain, one of the reasons people like smoking is it takes like literally seconds for you to get your effect. So if you're in like chronic pain and all you care about is reducing the pain, if you take a hit, then maybe the smoking's not great, maybe you want to go towards vaping, but that's what's going to get into your system the fastest. Whereas edibles, they take a much longer time, but they stay in your system longer potentially. And then there's also the issue of bioavailability. The different forms are going to have different measures of bioavailability. Karen talked about some of the technology. I'm blown away by the technology in this industry. Where they're going is towards the genomics, trying to figure out exactly what your particular system would do best by. And they're working on cultivation and trying to cultivate plants with certain profiles of compounds. They might get into, what do they call it when the pharmacies, the compounding, where you kind of have like a spice rack of all your different compounds, and someone comes in and says, well, I need this and this and this, and they go and they get, okay, here's this, this, and this, and they create your own little profile for you. That might, a lot of people have been talking about that. I don't know how real it is or not. But with the nanotechnology, the modes of delivery, trying to get it into your system in ways that it's most effective, and trying to target it to the particular part of your body or to the particular condition that you're trying to address, that's where the future is, and we're just beginning.
Now I have does cannabis have an expiration date? Because something that I get a lot of products because I work here, right? And sometimes I just keep storing them, but I don't know if it's like mandatory for every manufacturer to put an expiration date on their products, or how can you tell when something is about to not get you the same or the desired results, where you can put it away and toss it?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because the state really is pretty weak in terms of there's no shelf life testing for products, and you can put a 10-year expiration date. We do have some clients that have been doing shelf life studies, and we found it's like obviously with the food and the more perishable products it's typically whenever that would expire, whenever a gummy would expire is probably the same time when you shouldn't consume that product anymore. With some of the flowers and things like that, we've seen that after like 90 to 120 days, it really depends on the type of container that it's sold in. Like some people do the nitrogen-filled cans, some people do other products. Those retain better, but there's this thing called the vampire effect. It's something that's sealed really well, so you can open it in 6 months, and it's good for 2 days, and then after that, it's 6 months and 3 days old. So that's something that the state really has chosen not to regulate yet. It's kind of up to the manufacturers and the product makers, but I would say generally if it's like a food or perishable, it falls in line with that. The vape carts, we don't know. We have people that have carts that are 3 years old and they test the same.
Because I've been always hesitant to consume product that I...
Food and like any type of edible product and any type of flower product, 3 months, 4 months is kind of, I would say that, the lifespan of those. And the other, the more manufactured product, vape carts and the concentrates, those have a little bit longer shelf life.
We actually do have a question. Now, as we're streaming live, we have a question from our social media that is asking, now how would this be treated like a medicine? Now, this person has PTSD, ADHD, anxiety, and depression. Now, how would they take that as a medication? Would it be as needed or every 4 hours? They're curious about how to consume it to treat all those ailments.
That's definitely a tough one. You want to take a stab at that one?
I'm not a doctor. I'm not licensed. I I've read a lot. Based on what I've read, this is one of the things we're trying to grapple with our technology, is a lot of people today have multiple conditions, and different samples are going to address different conditions, and what if you have multiple different problems, how do you deal with that? I would say those diseases or medical conditions, they tend to cluster at the top here, and so most of those are low THC symptoms. From everything that I've heard, people don't really have set like every 4 hours or every 6 hours. They kind of take it when they need it. They see how long it lasts, and when it stops working and they need more, they seem to take more at that point. So that's kind of my sense of how it generally works. That's probably the best that I can do.
One thing I was gonna add to that is kind of like what Ruth said earlier, it is kind of trial and error. You're gonna have to try different things, try different edibles, different smoke, different. For me, for example, I'm a very hyperactive guy. If I try a certain strain like green crack, I get in my own head, I have 1,000 things to do, but I move nowhere to do anything. But if I'm on an indica or a certain type of, like I hate to say it, it's a certain strain called San Fernando Valley OG. When I smoke that, I feel more calm, more relaxed. I can sit in front of my computer and actually get some work done without being distracted in any way. So each person has a different effect. You know, it's funny, in Port Hueneme, we sell more indica than sativa, and we sell more flower than other stuff, and higher vapor cartridges. Vapor is continuing to be the fastest growing market share. But in West LA, where our other location is, we sell more sativa. But then if you look at the demographics over there, the best way to describe it is Hollywood, artsy guys, they want us to be more creative and open up mind, so they'll do more sativas than indicas. So really back to the question is really trial and error, seeing what works best for you. Start slow and steady, and then see what other medications you're taking. Make sure they don't have an exemplary factor when you do take cannabis, so that you have a balance. Focus on the CBDs to start with.
I was going to say that as well. I would start with the CBD, and then kind of the pure form of CBD, and see how that makes you feel, and then I would kind of just step up the ladder from CBD to higher ratios, including THC. I've seen certainly with people with pain, you know, they can just take pure CBD and it'll manage the pain. But I've seen other people all along the spectrum, and what we tend to do is kind of step them up the chain. And some people can only manage their pain with pure THC. Now that's just one condition, but you know, I think in this world today where we don't have a lot of scientific research out there, it's mostly anecdotal, and yet it's still personal. So you're going to have to experiment, as the husband tells us.
Okay, do we have any more questions on the floor for our panel today?
I see.
Yes.
I'm still very candid. As you said, Aaron, you take care of 1/3 of California in the testing facility and testing. What really differentiates your lab compared to in the old days? You know, there's other labs that are out there, for example, SC Labs that was the #1 lab in pre-2018 era, and I believe they're still around and they still have a big market share. What really differentiates your testing facility and your lab compared to others?
Got it, that's a great question. It really starts with the history of our company and tying that into regulations. We were the first accredited cannabis lab in the world. And we got accredited in 2012, so like 2 or 3 years before anybody else had done it. We've carried that to date. We have the most strict and advanced accreditation in cannabis. Of the 19 labs, there's only 2 that have the full accreditation for every asset. The state gives you a year after you get licensed to do it. We did it a year before it was even required. So it starts with that. Our facility, we developed our facility really with compliance in mind, like to be able to handle the workflow of all these samples. We used to do the high times events where they would come and bring 400 samples and they'd be like, we need these results in 3 days. And we're like, scratching our heads like, hey, this is what like every day of the week is gonna look like. So we need to figure out how to get this many samples, through the lab. Also in terms of like marketing support, we really, do a good job there of educating. We kind of have 3 buckets. We, on Instagram is how people in this industry market. We do, funny content where we kind of, make a little bit of mock of like black market stuff, some other issues. We do educational content where we teach people about terpenes and different tests we do, and then we do client features where we show people like Thunderstorm who are doing everything right. We have a long-standing relationship with, and we're almost in terms of like we're endorsing their products, saying, hey, we test, we see all the data, and these guys are doing it right. You know, when you buy one of their products, that we've tested it, and you know what you're paying for.
Speaking of that, since you guys mentioned that, can a lab market and help a brand? Are you guys partners? Can you guys be?
So there's no financial partnership, but we can, you know, we can promote, you know, our brands, which we do. And, you know, going back to the amount of testing that we do, you know, we test for probably of the top 20 brands in the state, we probably test for 15 of them. So we'll know pretty soon what our actual market coverage is. We actually test more than 50% of the products because we're testing for like the biggest brands. So we're doing a third of the compliance test, but the products like, you know, for instance, Cam has batches that are in the thousands, whereas you know, there's a lot of smaller manufacturers that are 500 to 1,000. So, you know, we should know pretty soon within a month or two once Metric spits out data, but we believe we're like in the 50 to 60% range in terms of when you actually go buy a product, there's about a half or greater chance that we test them.
You mentioned the word metric. Can you explain that to the consumer?
Yeah, so Metric is basically it's accountability, traceability software system that the state is requiring everybody on. And what Metric does is it tags it starts with these tags, which are like RFID chips, and they go on each individual plant that a grower has, which is basically the start of anything that any one of us do starts at the cultivation source. We all have to either, we test, but Cam has to have material for vapes, for other products, so it starts there. It follows the lifeline of that process. You know, the flower comes down, it's sold as flour, some goes to extracts, it follows it to the extract. It follows it all the way through to the end retail sale. So they have a complete chain of custody for the product. You know, it really helps skirt the black market. It also helps make sure that the state's collecting taxes for all these products, which are, taxes are a good thing. That's why we have roads that we can drive on. That's why we have public schools. That's why we have consumer safety. You know, a lot of people, taxes get a bad rap, but I think if we didn't get to experience the things the taxes paid for, we'd all be pretty upset.
Interesting that you just said the metric system and hemp-derived CBD does not fall under the metric system because doesn't have THC,
So
and it does. You can't ship it nationally. So what should consumers be aware of in those two different areas?
So that's a great question, actually, and I tell people this all the time. Cannabis products are 1,000,000 times safer than CBD products. You know, going back to the 3 years ago, everything had pesticides in it. There's really no requirements right now for CBD products, and they're federally legal, depending on whose legal opinion you go by. We test for some CBD. Really, the only requirement for CBD right now is we just did the first California hemp CBD test in history, like this past month. You have to do one potency test. The guy had 100 acres. We did one potency test of hemp product, and that's it. That's the only thing required. No pesticides, no heavy metals, no final product testing. We tested. We did one potency test in a hemp field.
That was just to determine THC level.
That was just to determine the THC level, and that's gone on to make products. So, we work with several CBD brands, and we're, big advocates. American Safe Access has 100,000 members. We're working, through them with the FDA to kind of suggest some testing and accountability for hemp. But right now, it's very lacking. You're actually better if you're in the market for a CBD product. You're better off going to a dispensary and buying something that has cannabis-derived CBD. You're going to actually know what you're getting. There's product safety, all those things. Whereas the hemp market, there's some good brands, but I would say more than half of the stuff out there right now is not quality. It doesn't have what it says. We did a piece for CNBC. They brought 20 products in, 20 hemp-derived CBD products in. 3 out of the 20 passed the California cannabis regulation test.
As far as labeling goes, and maybe you can help add to this, there's been a lot of studies done that show that if you look at the content, you look at the label on the package, and then if you go and actually test the product, those two sets of numbers don't match. And many different, I think I've read 3 to 5 different studies where they've gone in and each has separately looked at a variety of different products, and they found maybe a third have the potency that's reported on the package, and you have like CBD is either higher or lower than the labeled product, and the same with THC. Some people, there's been a variety of explanations for this. One person said, and I was going to ask you if you ever answer the question, well, perhaps if it's sitting on the shelf and it's aging and the compound is changing over time, that could account for the change in the label contents. But from what I've read, most of it is either the labs or somewhere along the line someone's cheating, and they're labeling with higher contents because they can sell it for a higher price or more people will buy it. But there's also a lot in there about how while the state mandates testing, there's no protocols, and that different people will use different methods to do the testing and come up with different numbers. And at some point, they need to come up with standards and protocols so everyone's using the same type of equipment and getting hopefully more alignment in the way they're doing the processing so it can be more consistent. Do you see the standardization or any sort of mandated protocols that are going to help normalize this problem?
Yeah, that is a big problem in terms of, even we deal with it on the, on the analytical side, is our suppliers aren't regulated like we are. And so people can choose suppliers depending on certain things like higher, you can buy potency standards that will give you basically a higher potency method. So yeah, we're going to the BCC lab, they're having a lab workshop this week, and that's one of our recommendations that we've been piloting is, they've got a great framework, but there's no, like in the FDA, if you're doing pesticides, you get 3 options. So everybody's doing pesticides one of 3 different ways, and it doesn't matter what type of instrument you have to, you have to follow one of the 3 processes. And in cannabis is like, you can make up your own and validate it. Like I always tell people, like there's some other labs that don't, have the, moral turpitude to do everything right. The ethics aren't there. They just want to be able to print highest potency and pass everything so they can keep the clients who aren't trying to do everything right happy. And there's really no way to police that within the framework. There's a lot of room for manipulation where you could technically say you're doing everything right, but it's not really right.
I'll talk to that too. I mean, and as Aaron said, we've been using Cannabis for a long time. But we did spend a fair amount of time canvassing other labs in the industry and trying for various products. And we have found a variety of inconsistency. And a lot of it has to do with just sort of rigor in their processes, and certainly with the, there needs to be improvement in the standardization and the standards themselves. And what we found in other labs, for example, is that they have a fair amount of variability in what they test. You can test the same thing and it would come out, we test it twice and it would come out with different results that with a greater variability than we had hoped, which is why we went back and do everything now with Cannabis. So having a brand or having the manufacturers that also work with the right labs is very important. It's hard for the consumer to know, but at least we're moving towards where we need to move towards. But there's still room for improvement.
That's where you go, hopefully, rely on good dispensaries at the end of the day. We actually look at the COAs, we look at where the lab testing is coming from, we're looking at which brands are doing what and how they're doing it. And hopefully, we have a team here that actually looks at all the products and services. It's not just based on price, but actually quality of product, and they can see where the testing comes from and going from there. So it is really important that the dispensaries are the differentiating factor in that sense.
Okay, so if there's no further questions, we're gonna go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah. There's a lot of talk about different cannabinoids. Is there any plans to bring some of those lesser known ones, like THCV was mentioned, CBN? Are there any plans to those to make them more mainstream, or is there any studies that you guys are personally excited about?
I can't point to any particular studies, but I know that we've been experimenting with CBN. We actually had a CBN product a couple of years ago. We made it accidentally in the lab. We spent another year trying to make it again. We couldn't. So, but we did have plenty of product to test, and it was great for us. So it is becoming more available now. We're personally out of the extraction part and the distillation part of the industry. So we are seeing other extractors that are now making these compounds available. THCV certainly is one that's gaining some notoriety. The key for us as a brand and as a manufacturer is to make sure that there's enough of a market there to justify all the expenses of launching a new product. And that's one of the things that's one of the downsides of all the regulation, is bringing a new product to market is quite expensive. So only the larger brands are going to be able to do that. And I will say that there's, some movement towards mediocrity in some of the products in the industry. But there are certainly brands that want to push the envelope and want to try these new technologies and these new types of products. And those brands will continue to be innovative. I would say for the consumers and for the dispensaries, seek out these brands, because there are brands that are doing very, very interesting stuff. Obviously THCA as well, where you get the pain management but without the psychoactivity. So it's definitely coming. The hard part for us was really just being able to just having access to the compounds and trying to blend them into the products. But there is some innovation going on in the growth of the cultivation side of things to make these things more available as well. So that's great.
My last question, promise. As business owners and people who've been working in the cannabis industry, other than banking, other than the stigma, other than education, other than social equity, what do you see as the biggest challenge that cannabis faces, either as an industry or as you individually in your businesses?
Education.
And what are you trying to do to make that happen?
That's an hour-long.
This really bothers me about the cannabis industry.
You do get the award for the best questions for today. From our perspective, I think really the biggest challenge we see in California really is kind of a battle between shifting from the unlicensed market and getting everybody into the fully regulated market. At the same time, competing with a lot of money that's coming in the industry. So we're kind of, those of us that are in the industry are kind of getting squeezed from both sides. One side is a lot of competition and a lot of well-funded companies that may or may not be doing the right things. Some are, some aren't. And then also, just getting through this, all the regulations, and then also having to compete with what's out there in the unlicensed market. I think one of the things we've learned a lot here today is the unlicensed market is really a problem. We all came from the unlicensed market, so it's hard for us to really, say bad things about it. But the truth is, there's so much good stuff that's coming out of the licensed market, is that we just have to shut down the unlicensed market, and that's a huge challenge. The fastest way to do that is to tell the consumers to shop at shops like Wheelhouse here. That's the best way to do it. And you have to pay the higher price because it's well worth it. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was reiterating what Cam said. Black market is certainly the biggest problem. I think I just saw that the legal market is going to be $3 billion this year in California, and the illegal market is going to be $9 billion. So it's literally 3 times as big. And yeah, as Cam said too, it really all starts with the consumer, because that's what those are the dollars that everybody's chasing. The consumer really gets, picks where the money's going, and the more people that go to licensed retailers, the better it is for all of us, and the price will come down. The Wheelhouse price, if they didn't have to compete with the black market, they could have lower prices because the products they would be buying would be priced more reasonably. Like right now, just on the buy side, Cam's dealing with artificially high prices because the black market's lower, and they're taking a lot of the product that would be going to the regulated market, which would cut the regulated prices substantially.
Yeah, isn't what we're trying to do today really the answer to that question, and that's educate the general public into really what's going on?
I think
Yeah.
that the legal market is being squeezed by the black market and by kind of, I guess they're calling it the unlicensed market, kind of the people who with who are cashing in on the cannabis gold mine or gold industry without really caring about what they're doing. So there's a lot of fraud, and there's a lot of really bad products out there. And the guys who are trying to do a really good job have a really difficult time competing with that, because all these other players, they can offer lower prices, and they're really putting the squeeze on the legal players who are really trying to do the right thing. And really, for the legal market to succeed, they really need to minimize the black market and all the fraud out there. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to compete, because everyone wants a good price. And it's very tempting, you know, someone says, well, you know, this product is $30 and they're trying to offer the same thing, but better, you know, the real quality for $50. Someone's going to say, well, why would I pay $50 if I could get it for $30? And it's really hard to compete with that. And, you know, you say, well, people want good products and they want quality. And everyone thinks, yeah, these guys are doing a great job, but when faced with the decision, how many people say, yeah, I'll pay the $50? That's a real tough choice. So I think really the pressure, the ability of the black market to undercut and to get around the regulations and not have to pay the costs that the legal markets are paying is a real problem. And I think really until they can kind of control the black market and all the fake stuff out there, it's going to continue to be a problem. Now I know in the state that recently they've been increasing the amount of raids, and they're trying to, you know, to go after the black market to some extent. If they can get rid of the black market, then they need a lot more enforcement to try and enforce standards. They have standards, but what I've heard is they're not doing a great job of enforcing them. So you're enabling all these kind of unlicensed people to, again, undercut the legal markets. But again, I think, yes, education and having these people tell their stories and what they're really trying to do, and why it's really in your best interest to pay a little extra to get the good stuff. I think that's really how we go about doing this.
Tell your friends.
I'm going to come from a little different approach. Mine is, as a business owner, I really got to understand who I am, what I'm trying to provide, and how I want to provide that. That being stated, I could be the Domino's of the world and try to conquer the world, or I could be, as you guys know, Ventura County, toppers of the world. And don't care what Domino's does, don't care what Pizza Hut does. I'm staying local and staying in my community, and I'm going to buy local community ingredients. I'm going to offer local. So understanding which business you are and what you want your model to be is a very important part. I believe, yes, we are being squeezed by the black market. We are being squeezed by the white market with a lot of money. But again, if I have a loyal customer base and my local customers love me, it doesn't matter what marketing, money, budget, anything else anybody does. My mom works at B&B Carter for 22 years, and there's a Home Depot right next to her. And they're more expensive, but they've never lost business in the last 25 years since they've opened. Why? Service, community, product, local. So it really just depends on what you want to do and how big you want to get and where you want to get. For the brands, obviously, that's the whole thing about a brand. You want to conquer the world, and the bigger you get, the more you go. Nike, they don't stop spending billions of dollars on marketing, but they also make billions of dollars in revenue. So there's always a pro and a con. It's just how you really want to run your business, and from a dispensary's perspective. I really look at it as retail, and if anything is retail, it's very simple. I keep saying this to all manufacturers, brands, and everybody else. There's two things that a retailer cares about. One, turn inventory. How much inventory can we turn in margins? Because the margins make a difference on how we can help our consumer, right? And the better margins we have, the better price we can give our consumer, and the more traffic we can drive for that. And also defining what kind of products we have and making sure we carry the right brands. So that's really the differentiator for me as a business owner. Again, I would love to acquire 5 or 6 more dispensaries, call them all the same name, and you guys know no matter which location you get to, you're going to have Thunderstorm available, you're going to have X brands available, you're going to have X level of service, X expectation of education, and a quality of service.
Okay, so I want to personally thank Wheelhouse. I think I speak for everybody out there. Thank you so much for hosting this today, and thank you for being an amazing dispensary. And a big round of applause for Wheelhouse, please. And this is just for me personally, Z, you have a vision, and I truly believe in it, and I hope that much success to this place specifically, because they actually care about this community. So thank you guys. Thank you, Z, very much. This is going to conclude Cannabis Curious, which is brought to you by Wheelhouse. I want to thank everybody for coming out today, and I want to really thank our panel. Another round of applause for them. And that's going to conclude everything today. Thank you so much for coming out.